Hello, hello. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Oh, there, finally, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. Hi. How's it
Yeah,
going?
I'm doing okay, man. Sorry, I couldn't get here any sooner. I just had clients and calls and stuff that I was dealing with. So
Yep.
I'm here now, though.
All good. We are just waiting for a couple more minutes to trickle for folks to
Okay.
allow folks to trickle in. We have, I think, 30 attendees right now,
Okay.
and we're very excited for the session.
Cool. Are you in San Francisco right now?
I am. I am not in you. What about you?
I'm in Austin right now.
Yeah, seems very sunny right now.
It's sunny, but it's freezing. It's like 20
Oh,
degrees outside.
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's very bright.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll do this.
Okay.
That's better.
We'll give one more minutes for folks to join in, and then we will start.
Okay.
We have about 40 attendees.
It's not bad.
That's not bad. Yep. Um, I feel we will have a lot of questions. We already have, I think, 7 or 8 audience questions.
Oh, good.
And I am like,
Let's just do those.
I'm very pressed for time right now.
Yeah,
So I'm feeling the pressure.
I know.
But
Yeah.
uh, okay, maybe we'll start the session and let folks continue to trickle in. Um, hi everyone. Thank you all for joining. I am Gorish, the founder and CEO of Sybil, the world's best AI assistant for sales rep. And today, I can't wait to kick off this fireside chat with the legendary Scott Leese. As many of you know, Scott started Thursday Night Sales, which became an absolute phenomena in the entire sales community. It was the number one weekly happy hour for sales community in the world, and it attracted over 30,000 attendees, unique participants. Instantly, me, when I shifted from being a Stanford lecturer to a sales tech founder, Thursday Night Sales was my exposure to the sales community and one of my first sales communities that I joined in the space. And it was an absolute blast. Early days, just learning from the community. But TNS was like only one of the things that Scott has done in his life. Like he's 6 times VP of sales. He has helped mint 12 unicorn startups at this point, and today he helps sales teams and founders scale their revenue from 0 to 25, which is the hardest piece, and does it with efficiency and like very specific insights. He has been helping the Sybil team with unique insights for our GTM motion. And then last but not the least, Scott has also authored 2 Amazon bestsellers on sales and GTM. And actually, we will be giving both of those away to 2 lucky winners at the end of the webinar. Today, we will dive into his personal journey, uncover how he has built the strong networks in the sales and GTM community, explored his go-to market frameworks and tools for success, and also, since AI is all the rage right now, get his take on how AI is reshaping sales and what can we expect as we look into 2025. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for the kind introduction.
Uh, the, so the first question, I think that's on everyone's mind right now, right? You went from being an individual contributor in the AE role to a sales manager to a VP of sales in under 3 years. Like,
Yeah.
walk us through that journey because that's such a short time. Most people don't even make one career jumps in that time frame, and you have made multiple. So help us understand how were you able to achieve
Yeah. I don't know if I'd recommend it. Let me just start there.
that.
uh, I purposely picked a very early stage startup because my hypothesis was I would have a better chance to move up faster. I did
Hmm,
not want to go work for some big, boring company and kind of have to wait for, me to hit a particular tenure amount in order to be eligible for a promotion, or wait for somebody to retire or die, God forbid, before I could take their role. So I thought, well, if I go to an early stage company, it'd be easier for me to be noticed. If the company grows, they'll probably promote from within. And so I think I can try to position myself for some of those roles. So that's what I did. I went to an early stage startup in the San Francisco Bay Area. Um, I got a entry level account executive role. I was only in that role for 7, 8 months, maybe, before they promoted me up to sales manager. I got my team to be the best team in the company. Then they gave me another team, and so forth. And then I sort of ceilinged out. But I only reached this one particular place, and I said to them, hey, how do I get to this VP level? Like, what do I have to do? And they kind of told me, well, you're never going to be a VP here. You don't have enough experience, to do so. And I said, well, I guess it's time for me to go. And so I quit sight unseen. I didn't have another job lined up or anything like
Wow.
that. I think I was 29 years old, maybe at that point in time.
Wow.
But I just felt like, I'd done really, really well. I didn't understand their perspective of, I'll never be one just because I haven't been one before. I haven't been around long enough. I'm like, shouldn't my performance indicate what I'm capable of? So I quit. And, somebody that had worked at that original startup had just launched a new company. And so they
Hmm,
hired me as the VP of sales, and I was off and running after that. So is a lot of work. Number one, again, not sure I'd recommend it. I made 1,000,001 mistakes that, looking back, are like, oh, stupid stuff that I should have known better, but I didn't at the time. I worked an obscene amount of hours. Again, not something that I would necessarily recommend, certainly not for everybody. Not something that I would be able to do now at almost 50 years old, as opposed to, barely 30. But I worked an obscene amount of hours, and I really just like committed to it. It was the thing that mattered the most to me, was how do I get good at this role so I can get out of this role and never do it again. That was what I thought about being
hmm,
an AE. How do I get out of being an AE? I have to be so good at it that I can teach other people how to do it so I never have to do it again. Same thing with
hmm.
sales managers, same thing with sales director, and then same thing with VP of sales. And so that was kind of my thought process in the beginning, like that.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Like at 29 years old, it takes courage to get out of an extremely high paying job and go in without an option, without an exit gate right there. So kudos onto that. What were some of the pivotal moments, like the aha moments where you felt like, okay, uh, this is a bump up from what I've been doing so far in those 3, 4 years period when you transition from one career ladder to the next?
Well, the very first thing was recognizing that I got more fulfillment out of helping my neighbor in the cubicle next to me close a deal than I did closing deals on my own. It was
Hmm,
it was more exciting. I felt more joy, more pride, or whatever. I closed a deal myself, like, cool, I feel great. But if I can kind of help my friend sitting next to me who's been struggling, and I'm like, hey, try this, do this, say this, and all of a sudden they close a deal and they're just like so happy, that feeling was what I wanted. I wanted to replicate
hmm,
that feeling over and over and over again. So that was the first light bulb of like, you don't want to be an individual contributor. You want to be a leader. You want to help teach other people, how to
hmm.
do this, right? The second bulb was sort of recognizing that my sales process um, worked outside of just me and was
mm,
working for all of these other people. And in particular, when it worked at the second company, not just the first company. And I'm like, okay, this is actually transferable regardless of what product or what industry I'm in.
mm,
Right. Um, and the third aha moment was just me consistently betting on myself and not playing it safe,
mm,
walking away from that one job sight unseen. I actually, out of all the full-time W-2 roles I had, I think only once did I leave someplace with another job lined up. So,
that's
and
great.
I always went back to the beginning. I always went back to this same stage of like, two people in a garage, no customers type of
Mhm,
thing. I wanted all of that pressure and all of that glory, frankly, as well, if
mhm.
we actually made it.
Yeah.
you know it's kind of like the last shot mentality for like a basketball or something like that. It's like, who wants the ball? Well, I wanted the ball. I wanted all that pressure. I wanted all that glory. And if I close like $1 million deal for Sybil, you know
Mhm.
I joke sometimes, but it's like, you paint a mural of my face on the wall. If I close a
Yeah.
$1 million deal for Amazon, who cares? I'm like a line item on a spreadsheet, right?
We would
So
crown
that
you
it
king on.
appeals to me. Yeah. So that aha moment was, keep betting on yourself, keep going in early, keep building things, and good things will kind of happen, right?
Mm,
So I would say those three moments were really, really pivotal and kind of, just like eye opening to where I was going, what I'm doing, and oh wow, this is actually kind of working
mm.
now. So yeah.
Wow. So, Scott, when you move, like when you started, like early stages, you started helping the person next to you, helping them close that deal, and that helped you to build a recognition brand within the company. Oh, Scott can actually help build a team and manage them and get them towards success. Was that initial thought of, okay, I need to help the person next to me, was that more deliberate, like where you knew that you need to get to a sales manager role as quickly as possible, or did it happen more naturally where the team just moved or gravitated towards that
That's,
mindset to make
that's a
you a
good
manager?
question. I think the first people I started helping were actually two friends of mine. You
Mm,
know, one guy had been on the college tennis team with me years before. So we'd known each
mm,
other for years, and we just happened to land sales jobs at the same startup. And he was kind
mm,
of struggling. And I'm like, well, I don't want my buddy to get fired here, or I don't want him to struggle. So like, I got to teach him how to do this so he can be good as well. That was just kind of natural, right?
mm,
And then I had another friend that I met, through work, and I'm like, well, I want to help this guy, do
mm,
do well. But when I started seeing them succeed, I started to get that feeling of like, this is a lot more fun. Then it
mm,
became very intentional for me. You
mm,
talked about the mistakes that I made. In my brash naivete and arrogance at the time, um, I asked to talk to the CEO, and I got a meeting with the CEO, and I was like, hey, I got to be honest with you. I don't think the sales managers in place do anything. They don't coach
wow.
anybody. They're not helpful. They didn't teach me anything. They're not helping these people. I think I can do a better job. I'm already doing some of this job. What do I have to do in order to get promoted to that manager role? And his initial reaction, metaphorically, was like slapping me around, which, fair point. Like, probably not the best move to just go into the CEO's office and just like throw sales managers under the bus, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Well,
he had
probably
to educate
also your
me.
boss.
Yeah, he had to educate me on my tact and approach, right? I didn't know any better. I had never had a job before, let alone a corporate sales job. But interestingly enough, after he sort of told me like, hey, this is not the right way to do it. After that, he said, here's the things that I'm looking for. Here's what I'd like
Mm,
to see. And I wrote every single one of those things down. And I was like, I'll see you in a couple months after I do all these things. Right. So it became very intentional. So I say it sort of started as a natural thing to try to help my friends. And then it became something intentional that I pursued and chased relentlessly.
That's incredible. Mm. And then once you moved to get your first VP of sales job, you became a VP of sales 6 times. What do you think made you so sought after? Like getting into these companies brand new, where many times, as you shared, like they don't even have a revenue stream ongoing. Were there some playbooks you developed, or like you had people that would follow you around from company to company, or something else entirely?
Well, once you sort of prove you're not a one hit wonder
Hmm.
in anything, then I think you become more attractive, as you said, more of a sure thing. People look at you that way, at least.
Hmm.
It's like Garish started one company. If you have a successful exit with Sybil, you IPO or sell the business or whatever, if and when you decided to go build another company, you have a track record of success. So people would
Hmm.
be more likely to come work for you. People might be more likely to give you, venture capital money. The fundraising process might not be as difficult and whatnot, right? So after I had had a couple good results, I think it is easier for people to look at me as a, known entity or, kind of
Hmm.
a guarantee of sorts. It's like rather than take a gamble on this person who's never done it before, this guy's done this exact thing a couple times successfully, and he still
Hmm.
wants to do it again. He's maybe a little bit, better qualified for the role. So the early successes compound upon each other, made it
Hmm.
easier to get subsequent roles. And then you
Hmm.
said something really interesting, like, did people kind of follow me? 100%. I mean, I had people follow me across different states. I left San Francisco, came to Austin. Multiple people relocated from San Francisco to Austin.
Hmm.
Um, I've had people work with me at, I think, 3 or 4 companies out of the
Wow.
like 6 or 7 that I worked at full
Crazy.
time. I've had people also work there. So I think just building that kind of loyalty and really trying to give a shit about your people
Hmm.
and their lives and help them get where they're trying to go in their life. And if they believe in you in that way and they experience results, even if I was hard on them, if they're like, Scott's kind of tough on me, but I went from making this to this and I went from here to there and now I got promoted to this role. Oh, he's going to do something else. What's he going to do? If
Hmm.
he's picking that, maybe it has a future. And so when you start something new and you can immediately pull from people who've worked with you before, who know
Hmm.
your personality, your work ethic, your communication style, the way you like to sell, your process, it's like having anchor tenants in a strip mall, right?
Hmm.
It's like I have these guarantees rather than me having to hire
Hmm.
strangers off the street.
Yep.
I can hire my crew of like 5 or 6 people initially that I know can get this sucker off the ground,
Yep.
right? And it just makes it easier, you know. But I think just
Hmm.
investing my time with some of these people early on, and fortunately, they had success, and so they kind of would choose to follow some of that success.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I remember when I started, my best hires, even to date, have been people that I've worked with in the past, even colleagues, batchmates that are known entity, as you said, like people that you can trust and they can trust you to make the right decision, uh, and stick with you in the worst ones. So
Yeah.
very, very, very unique. Mm, what motivated you to shift from like an operational sales leadership role into an advisory role, helping other founders and also building your own companies? How did you know like this is what you wanted to do? And
Well, a few different things. After you've been in this game a few times, your
mm-hmm.
rose-colored glasses start to fade a little bit, And so some of the like naivete that I had disappeared, and I started to really understand the mechanics of these things. And I started to have a couple exits. And as a VP of sales, I don't think that I deserve as much as a founder in an exit, but I don't think I deserve 70 times less. So
Hmm.
if there's an exit and Garish makes 50 million and I make 500K, that stopped sitting well with me.
Hmm.
And I didn't like that. So I started to get disillusioned a little bit with that game. I got more experience and I got older and I started thinking, shit, I'm 35, 40 years old, 45 years old. Like, I don't know if I really want to listen to this 22-year-old who just graduated from Stanford tell me what to do. And
Hmm.
this is the way things should be done anymore.
Hmm.
That could be ego, that could be pride, whatever it is. Just like you lose the appetite a little bit for it. But I started building a brand pretty heavily in 2016. I released a
Hmm.
book. I started, sharing more content and stuff like that. And in that journey, I always have people in my DMs saying, "Hey, can I talk to you about XYZ? I want some help. I want some coaching. I want help for my startup." So I
Hmm.
ended up sort of on the side having these like side hustle kind of businesses or different revenue streams, book royalties, coaching calls, small scale like consulting gigs. Then I
Hmm.
started this Surf and Sales Summit. So I've been running this sales conference called Surf and Sales for 8 years now. That became another
Hmm.
stream of income and interest. And then Thursday night sales. And so like all of these things. And I started to realize, I have entrepreneurship in me. I just never really realized it and never took the like full leap that you did, for example. But I kept going to these very early stage startups as an
Yeah.
operator. And you don't do that unless you're a little
Yep.
bit crazy and entrepreneurial and then starting these
Yeah.
kind of other things, right? And what happened was the income that I was earning from all this other stuff ended up reaching level with the income that I was earning from my W-2 job,
Hmm.
right? And I had always said to myself, if that happens, now that will be the time to make a leap. I'm
Hmm.
I'm fairly fiscally conservative. I never liked the idea of just like quitting being a VP of sales, starting a consulting business from nothing, from scratch,
Hmm.
no clients, nothing. I didn't want to do that. So I waited until I was
Hmm.
already earning really well. And then I said, you know what? I'll drop this W-2 gig. Worst case scenario, I fail on my own or I don't like it on my own. And the worst thing that can happen is I have to go get another CRO, VP of sales job. That's not
Hmm.
that bad in the grand scheme of
Yep.
life, right?
Yep.
So it was at that moment that I said, "Fuck it, like let's just go all in and see what can happen." So that's
Hmm.
kind of my thought process and my journey with it all.
I was going to ask this a little later in the conversation, but because you touched upon it, is that something like building a brand early on in the industry? Is that something you would advise to sales reps that are starting out in their career or somewhere in the middle? Or or would your advice be more on the side of like focus on your job and prove that you actually can
Yeah,
deliver results before building a brand out there?
yeah. My advice would be very heavily in favor of getting good at something before
Hmm.
worrying about building a brand. I never built a brand until I must have had a decade plus of experience at least
Hmm.
before I started like building a brand. So
Hmm.
what I actually think people need to do before worrying about brand is they need to build a sizable network.
Hmm.
That's the most important thing. Who do you know and how many of these people
Hmm.
do I know? How many people who can open doors for me? How many people who may hire me one day, right? Or maybe clients of mine one day?
Hmm.
How many people I can learn from, right? And I think people should spend way more time growing their network intentionally before worrying about brand. So
Hmm.
get good at your current role, grow your network, And then later on, when you've proven success and you have a larger network, then start worrying about brand.
Hmm.
That's kind of the progression that I would do. That's the progression that I did as well. Obviously, there's different ways to do it. I think people are less inclined to do it these days the
Hmm.
way that I'm talking about it. But I still think that's the best way.
How do you identify these and approach these mentors uh, who can have this impact on your career,
Well, I think like
especially
anything
as a
else,
rep?
I think like anything else, you just ask. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, I've been on LinkedIn for maybe 10 years now. I respond to every single DM that I get that is not like a sales pitch or a scammer or, do you want to be a State Farm franchise owner? Like anybody who asks me a regular, legit question, I respond
Uh-huh.
to, you know, and not very many people do that, but there are other people who do that. So shoot your shot,
Hmm.
shit, what's the worst thing that can happen? Somebody doesn't reply to you. Okay, that happens to us in sales all day long,
Yeah.
you know? So just reach out. And I think have an idea of what you're looking for. Because one thing that
Hmm.
is hard is when people reach out to me and I'm like, hey, how can I help you? And their response is like, I don't know. I just, I want to get better. I want to learn. Da, da, da. And I'm like, well, get better at what? Learn what? Like, give me some
Hmm.
direction here, you know? So
Hmm.
I think ask, number one, don't be afraid, just ask and shoot your shot. And number two, when you start to have an engaged, dialogue with somebody, have specific things in mind. Like,
Hmm.
Garish, I want to understand the fundraising process of how you raise this Series A.
Hmm.
What worked? What
That's
didn't
so
work?
true.
Da 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 da. Or somebody comes
Yeah.
to me and they say, Scott, I want to get better at sales. Like, what's your number one, prospecting tip? Or you
Hmm.
grew your network. I heard you on the webinar the other day say focus on growing your network. What is an easy process that I could try to follow to do that? Like that's
Hmm.
very specific and it's an actionable thing. So I can give you advice,
Hmm.
you can take action on it. And now if you come back to me a second time to ask for help, you can say to me, hey, I listened to you last time. Here's what I did. And that makes
Hmm.
me feel good as a helper. It makes
Hmm.
me think, okay, you might be worth my time because you actually followed through on my advice. So therefore,
Hmm.
I'm more likely to help you a second time or a third time.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So when I first started looking for advisors and mentors, one of the big questions I always had was, how do you make that relationship? Like, why would they give me their time and they continue to do so over a period of time, like over 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, right? So how do you see that happening? Because there's sometimes a hesitation. I know I used to face that a lot when I was starting out in my career, like getting your time or getting someone else's time. How do you think about it from your perspective, like as you're helping someone? What is going on in your head? And then are there things where I can, as someone who's seeking advice, can make that relationship valuable for both sides as opposed to just making it one-sided?
Yeah. Well, I think I care a lot about people taking action on
Hmm.
advice. My advice or anybody's advice is completely worthless if you don't do anything with it. And
Hmm.
so if you come to me for help and I give you advice and you don't do anything with it, I'm probably not going to be willing to help you a second or third time. I'd probably write
Hmm.
you off and just be like, well, this person doesn't really care that much.
Hmm.
Right. So implementing the advice and feedback, being open to it. Um, I like working with people who are humble, who know that they're not, experts at everything. Oh, I'm not interested in having a advisory kind of relationship where somebody asks me a question and then they immediately tell me why I'm wrong. And I'm like, okay,
I've seen
I,
that happen.
why am I here then? I mean, I can think of very specific situations with people in the last year or so that's happened. It's like, okay, we must all be wrong then. Um, the reciprocation part is interesting because I think it's an undervalued aspect. you
mm,
know, most founders are not thinking like, well, how can I make my advisor's job better or easier,
mm,
right? So you could do stuff like we're doing right now. You know, you
mm,
gave me a microphone and a platform and I'm on a webinar with 50 people. That's helpful, right?
mm,
It could be sponsoring events that they put on. You know, Sybil
mm,
could sponsor surf and sales. Could be sending
mm,
people to events. Maybe you buy a ticket.
mm,
Maybe you give a customer of yours a ticket to an event.
mm,
You support me through book purchases. You're talking about
mm,
giving away books. That's cool.
mm,
Best case scenario for somebody like me is, you know, lots of other founders in your kind of founder community and through university and through
mm,
Y Combinators of the world and different funds and whatnot. When those people need consulting help, sales advisory help, et cetera, you say, I know a guy you should talk to. And
mm,
so you're basically making introductions and funneling me leads. And
mm,
if I'm able to work with even one client like that, you got
mm,
a friend for life at that point in time,
mm,
you know, and I will do whatever you need at any point in time if that type of reciprocation is happening.
mm,
Unfortunately, that's very rare. You know,
mm.
most people who hire a, fractional sales leader or go to market consultant or whatever, it's all take,
Yep.
right? It's all, what can Scott do for me? What can Scott do for me? What can Scott do for me? Right. And there's never a, hey, how can we help you? How can we help you grow
Mm,
your business? How can I help you get more people like me? How can I support
mm,
these other things that you're doing? And just going that extra mile, you turn somebody from being an advisor to also being an advocate or an
mm,
ambassador or whatever, right? You take me from sort of just passively being like, yeah, Sybil is cool, to like, hey, have you guys heard of Sybil? Hey, have you all heard of Sybil? Have you done this? You should do this. You should do that. You should talk to them, right? And now I'm like more actively promoting it, and you're not even having to ask me to do anything,
mm.
right? And it
Yep. Yep.
lasts even beyond the engagement. Even if we have a 6 month engagement, 3, 4, 5 years from now, I might still be a fan, right? I
Mm,
had engagements with Sales Loft years ago,
mm,
right? I still feel good about them because of the way that they treated me and the way Kyle treated me. I had
mm,
an engagement with Gong years ago. I still work
mm,
with them in different capacities because they have maintained reciprocity in those types of relationships, right?
mm,
And I think that's a really good question and a good point that you brought up, that
mm,
more founders should try to pay attention to.
mm. And when we think about sellers like in early or mid stages of their career, does this also apply for them? And if like what are sort of shifts that it applies? Because over there, they're still trying to build their network, they're still trying to build their community and grow. So looking at mentors like you, like how should they be thinking about, hey, I want advice from Scott, uh, and I want to build a relationship with him. What does that mean for those folks?
I mean, it could be something as simple as just engaging with somebody's content every single day.
Mm, that's
Or
really
it could
easy.
be,
Yep.
or it could be as extreme as reaching out to somebody like me and saying, I want to learn from you. What can I do that you need support with? You
Mm,
know, I'll tell you a story. Um, I had this college kid reach out to me a little less than a year ago. Okay. And he reached out to me and said, I've been following you on LinkedIn. And I'm like, this kid's like 20 years old. I'm like, I
mm,
wasn't on LinkedIn when I was 20 years old. I wasn't thinking like this.
yeah.
But this guy's like entrepreneurial in his mind. And he says, I've been following what you do. I understand, you know, your products and your offerings and whatnot. I know you used to do community. I have an idea I want to run by you. Are you open to talk? And I'm like, okay, sure. Why not?
Yeah.
What is the idea this college kid has, right? He's
Yeah.
like, I think that you should build a private coaching community for CROs and VPs of sales. And I'm like, huh, that's interesting. I've
Uh-huh.
thought about that before. Right now, I only coach them on a 1-to-1 basis, but I can't
Yeah.
take 50 meetings a week coaching other VPs. So this would be like a one to many kind of idea, right?
Mm,
So this kid goes, I'll build the infrastructure. I'll build the
mm,
website. I'll build the community. I'll do all the technical stuff. Da 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 da. I'll help with like you know, asset building and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you, okay, like, what do you want from it? He's like, I don't want anything. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want anything? He's like, I don't want anything. I want to be able to ask you questions and get help from you as I go about my business journey. Right.
Mm,
Well, I refused to not pay him anything. I've paid him 30% of the profits that I've made from this business. But this kid came out of
that's
nowhere,
crazy.
right?
Yep.
So you can do stuff like that. It doesn't have to be that
Mm,
extreme. Like I said, it could be as simple as engaging with somebody's content every single day.
mm,
It could be going to the different webinars or in-person events that they speak at, right?
mm,
And it could also just be reaching out to them and saying, what can I do to be helpful to you? I have a couple questions for you, but what can I do to be helpful to you? Are you open to like a barter and trade kind of system or
mm,
structure? And I think you'd find that people are a lot more approachable and open to this kind of stuff than you might think.
mm. Those are really, really, and that kid is hopefully doing very amazing. Taking the
Yeah. Well,
shot is sometimes all.
I recently had to convince him not to drop out of school because he said he's making too much money now. And I'm like, dude, stay in school. Come on, finish school. Yeah, funny.
Beautiful. Awesome. Uh, Moving on to another topic, which Scott came up a lot, both in our previous Q&A and some of the questions over here. Uh, I want to hear, like, from your experiences, what is like one key framework that sellers and managers can adopt in their day to day, especially when we think about like big, like getting better at their job and going from like progressing in their careers.
Yeah. Well, there's sort of a tactical selling framework that I operate under that came through my life experience. If you don't know my story, I got really sick when I was 23 years old, and I ended up spending 4 years in the hospital fighting for my life. Had 9 major surgeries, 4 emergency surgeries, and while I was hospitalized, I ended up getting addicted to opioids, and so I had to kick off of dope on top of healing from all of my sickness and surgeries and everything else. When I got my first sales job, I started to recognize parallels between sales and the recovery process.
Mm,
Specifically, you can't walk up to somebody with addiction issues and tell them, hey, I got this amazing rehab facility. Can I take you there right now? That doesn't
mm,
go well. Okay. People recoil from that. They're not ready to hear that. Everybody knows the first thing you have to do with an addict is get them to admit they have a problem.
mm.
Well, what do we do as salespeople typically? The
Yeah.
most stereotypical sales call is, hey, Garish, this is Scott from Sybil. How are you today? Great. Over at Sybil, we do blah, 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 blah. And all you're doing is pitching the solution to somebody who does not believe they have a problem yet.
Mm,
So the framework that I came up with was this addiction model of selling, which is I need to get somebody to admit and recognize they have a problem. It's not good
mm,
enough for me to tell them they have a problem because then they're on the defensive. But if I can ask questions to get them to a place where they say, yeah, that's kind of a pain in my neck. That's a problem for me. Now they're a
mm,
little bit more open. But that's not enough to get somebody to take action. Everybody probably knows, unfortunately, people who recognize they have an addiction problem or a substance abuse problem of some sort that does nothing about it.
mm,
Well, the second component is they need to understand why they should care enough to make a change. It could be an addiction, it could be health, it could be
mm,
custody of your kids, it could be keeping your job, these kinds of things. In
mm,
business, people have business problems that they're not aware of how important they are, right?
mm,
By you not doing this, you are unable to achieve these things. And so I started
mm,
saying to people, has anybody ever taken the time to explain to you why this stuff is so important?
mm,
And I try to turn myself into a little bit of an educator for a moment, right? Not trying to insult
mm,
somebody's intelligence or tell them something, that they might already know, but it's just like, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but you know, I don't know, making something up, but like not being SOC 2 compliant leaves you open for these risks, which in turn could sink your whole entire company, da, 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 right? So there's that education kind of component, but that's not
Mm,
enough to make an addict take action
mm,
because everybody knows what addicts have to do is they have to hit this thing called rock bottom. And
yeah.
what rock bottom does is rock bottom creates urgency. And
Mm,
urgency is the hardest thing to create in a sales process. The hardest competitor to sell against is inertia and the status quo, right?
mm, yep.
We all have dealt with that before. People are
Yep.
like, yeah, this is a problem. I understand why it's important. I
Yeah.
just like wish I can't deal with this right now for whatever
Yeah.
reason, right? So we have to do something to make them recognize this is priority number one. We have to talk about like, hey, where does this problem sit on your list of other problems? We have to get them
Mm,
to agree this is priority number one and demands action right now. And if I do all of those things in that order, it's my belief that then and only then is somebody really truly open to hearing about your solution
mm,
or your product. They inevitably say to you, so Scott, I assume you like fix this or you help people with this. At that point,
mm,
they're giving me permission to tell them who I am and what we do. And that's the
mm.
solution. So when you ask me, what's the framework for sales reps and sales managers? That's my framework.
No, that resonates and like so much because this is like this inertia of not dealing with it right now because they know it's important, but it's not urgent and critical. Like we hear this so often as we build out the sales process. It's like
Yeah.
the number one thing that comes
Yeah.
up.
So reframe your mental model. Every time you run into that, reframe your mental model to say, these folks just haven't hit rock bottom yet.
Mm,
How do I make them recognize they're at rock
mm,
bottom or about to be at rock bottom?
mm.
Right. And
That's
salespeople
right.
don't do a good enough job of that. Sometimes we discover like $1 million problem for somebody.
Yeah.
We think that automatically should be their number one priority in their business. But
Hmm.
$1 million problem to Sybil is very different than $1 million problem to Microsoft.
Yeah.
Microsoft solves $100 million problems. They don't care about $1 million
Yeah.
problems, right? So that's why you've got to have this dialogue and level set with them on like, how urgent is this? You know, why do you want to
Mm,
fix this now when you didn't do it 6 months ago? Or why now and not 6 months from now? Talk to me.
mm.
Help me understand why this is something you want to sort out straight away right now. That's the urgency component.
Makes a lot of sense. Uh, Scott, we cannot have this session go without discussing AI, right? Uh, it is the single biggest thing that's going on in every single news article ever. Uh, what, in your opinion, is the biggest shift that AI has brought to the sales function till date?
Well, on the positive side, I think that it has eliminated knowledge and information as a moat, meaning
Mm,
everybody can have access to all the information straight away. So you can do research that would have took hours in 2 seconds, right?
mm, yep.
Um, and that is helpful, I think, for anybody who's in any kind of sales role, right? I can do research, I can learn about companies, especially if you're selling to like enterprise companies, publicly traded
Yep.
companies who have to put out their reports and all this kind of stuff, right? You can now easily digest that stuff by asking ChatGPT, give me 5 bullet summary of somebody's
Mm,
latest S1 report or whatever.
mm,
On the negative side, it's made everybody extremely lazy.
mm,
Extremely lazy. You're always looking for a shortcut and you don't want to admit it to yourself. You'd rather just say, well, I'm looking to be more effective. I'm looking to be more
uh-huh,
efficient. I'm looking to automate
uh-huh,
certain tasks, right? Well, really, you're just being a little bit lazy, is what's happening. And so there's a lot of sales skills and leadership skills that people have not learned in the last
mm,
couple of years that I think are problematic,
mm.
So good news and bad news, probably like most technology developments, but this one is like
Yeah.
very stark and very polarizing. As everybody's scared of like what's the future going to be and all this kind of stuff. But If I just think about right now and sit with right now,
Uh-huh.
research is like the number one thing I think that is the biggest benefit. I can learn anything in 2 seconds about whoever it is I need to talk to. But the risk is I'm getting lazy and I'm
Mm,
more apt to take shortcuts and cut corners and do things, in a volume based way rather than in something that's hyper personalized and maybe doesn't scale but will be more effective. That's the
mm.
risk.
That's a very unique perspective, and I love that a lot. One question that has come up in our audience Q&A before has been people want to use AI, and this is, and from my experience, this is true for both sales reps and sales leaders, but they don't know where to start because they don't understand what is good AI, what is bad AI. What's your suggestion for those sales teams to adopt these AI tools, but they're not still trying to figure out how do they look or find those tools?
Well, I think this is again where this network component comes into play. You know, um, we used to go, I'm going to blank on the websites, but we used to go look at static websites for like reviews of products and software,
Hmm.
like G2 or
Yep,
something like
G2,
that, or Trust Radius or
trusted.
companies like this, right? It's the same thing with like Yelp. I want to go to a restaurant in
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco, like I look up Yelp or whatever, right? Well, we actually don't trust those static websites anymore
Mm-hmm.
because we think that it's pay to play, if we're being
Mm-hmm.
honest with ourselves. Whether it's true or
Yep.
not, who knows? But we feel like it's pay to play. We feel
Mm-hmm.
like, well, these reviews are bullshit. Like somebody got paid to do this, or somebody has an agenda or whatnot, right? So we stopped trusting those static review sites and we started trusting peers,
Yep.
peer to peer recommendations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm trying to figure out what tools are good, what tools are not good, or whatever, I should go talk to people I know and trust already and say, hey, do you have experience with XYZ tool? Oh, you do.
Mm-hmm.
What was the experience? Good, bad, and ugly. And
Mm-hmm.
I can get feedback and reviews from a much more trusted source, people I actually know and have trust in, rather than some stranger autonomously leaving a review on a Yelp like site. That's
Mm-hmm.
not as trustworthy as somebody coming to me and saying, hey, Scott, we are trying to decide which AI coaching platform is the right one for us. What are the
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 you're aware of, and why do you like one over the other? Right. And they
Mm-hmm.
come to me and I give my feedback. They can go get data point 2, 3, and 4 by going to talking to other
Mm-hmm.
people who are out there using these things. You can't do
Nice.
that. You can't run that play as easily if you don't have a network.
Yeah.
And if you don't have, people who have used these tools or have clients who use these tools
Mm-hmm.
type of thing, right? So it goes back to you got to have a good network and then ask
Network.
that network, hey, what do you think about these things? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
if I got 3 or 4 pieces of really positive feedback from people I know and trust who are very successful and are doing well currently, and they all said, hey, you should use Civil, I'm going to pay attention to those people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I'm going to make my purchasing decision.
But yeah, goes back to having that network, having that mentor support from your community. And it makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense as well, given how crowded today's market are. Buyers are continuously filtering out like AI from their from their ears these days, is what I hear. Uh,
Yeah.
we have 10 minutes left, and I want to pick up a more specific audience question directly. I have one which is very interesting on our Q&A from Eric. So Eric is asking, how do you deal with the mental elements when things inevitably get very difficult and the odds are against you?
It's a great question. I don't recommend going through something like I went through, but if you do, and most people have been through something in their life that is traumatic or that the rest
Mm,
of the world would be like, I have no idea how you got through that, right?
mm,
You can use that event as a lighthouse of sorts, as an anchor, and be like, okay, I've already been through the hardest thing, knock on wood. I've already been
mm,
through the hardest thing I'm ever going to go through in my life. And I made it out the other side. how does this thing I'm dealing with now compare to that? And
mm,
most of the time, it's laughable. Like,
mm,
do you think in the grand scheme of my life, do you think I care about hitting quota? Do you think
mm,
I care if this random stranger picks up the phone or not? Do you think I care if you fire me? Whatever. I
mm,
can find another job. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I'm not in the hospital, right? Like, so I think what people need to do is when they're going through something difficult, look back on some of the difficult things you've already been through and use that
mm,
as a superpower and a source of strength, not as a weakness. Change your mental model into that is now a superpower, right?
mm,
And because I went through that, now you have perspective of, do I really care about that, about missing my quota? Do I really care about not getting promoted or whatever, or this deal not coming in, right? That for me has been the absolute game changer, and it's been 20 years now since I got out of the hospital, and I still use this framework right now. Still.
mm. Makes sense. Gary asks, and this is a question which has also been repeated previously by Adam uh, before. So, Scott, I'm curious if you have specific pieces of feedback that the CEO, and she's referring to the CEO that you spoke to and went about, I want to manage these people and lead these people, give you about becoming a VP of sales that you remember. And do you still agree with them, or have you changed your approach now that you have way more experience?
Well, point of clarification here, that CEO didn't give me advice on how to be a VP. They gave me advice on how to be a sales manager. So how to go
Mm,
from rep to manager, right? It was stuff like, cool, you're the number one sales rep. Go prove that you're not a fluke and do it a second and third time. It
mm,
was pick a couple buddies and turn them into superstars as well. So sort of do the job without having the title. The
mm,
third one was change your attitude, because I had this attitude of like throwing this manager under the bus and like looking for things that were wrong everywhere and kind of
mhm,
questioning company decisions, right? I'm very much inclined to go down that route. And I have to work very hard even now to not go that way. So he was like, you
mm,
got to change your attitude. You got to stop being so distrustful. You got to drink the Kool-Aid maybe a little bit is
mm,
kind of, what he was saying. You got to learn kind of an internal politics type thing, right?
mhm,
So those were some of the very specific things that he told me. He also told me to kind of become more of a book smart student of the game,
mm,
because you got to understand, like, I didn't study business. I'd never had a sales job. My folks were not in business. I had no mental model for like sales or business or revenue, nothing. Everything I was doing was just straight grit and hustle and like figuring things out. And so he was like, hey, you might want to go, read. You might want to go listen to some things. You might want to,
mm,
learn from some of the experts on this stuff. So it was stuff like that.
mm. Got it. And Simon asked, which book changed your life? I have this question as well, which
Which
is like,
book changed my
the,
life?
you're not
Hmm.
allowed to use your books.
No, yeah. Uh, Man, I might say Ender's Game, which
Mm,
has
that's a really good
absolutely
one.
nothing to do
Yeah.
at the surface with business or sales or anything like that. But I'm actually somebody who gets a lot more value from non-business books than I do
Uh,
from business books. And Ender's Game, in addition to be an amazing story, is very like political. It's very
yeah.
strategy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of war tactics and
Hmm.
things. It's got elements of working your way up the ranks and strategic things like that. And I read that book. I actually read every book in the entire Ender's Game series while I
Mm,
was in the hospital. But that was something that I think first like started making me evaluate relationships and kind of corporate infrastructures a little bit differently. And rather than being completely angry at them and opposed to even participating, look at it more like can I do this? Can I
Hmm.
figure out how to be a part of this structure? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Ender's Game is really fun book. I really enjoyed when I was reading it. Uh, that is all the time we have today for questions. I know there are a lot many questions which I have not picked up directly, but hopefully what Scott shared has been covered, and some of those questions are answered. Again, as Scott said, uh, you're more than happy to reach out to him directly over LinkedIn and ask specific pointers. I do want to quickly summarize a few of the things that he has shared from the conversation. Uh, and so, first thing that comes to mind is like, I mean, as especially in your early days and true also later on, you need to be bold and willing to take risk. You need to consistently bet on yourself and have you like focus on that like growth potential that sometimes people don't realize. People should People who are early in their careers should also focus on getting good at their work first, build their networks, and then once you have proven that you are really amazing, really smart, then work on or care about building a brand for yourself, because brand will come if you have proven your worth to others. They will help you build that brand, and then your mentor network and support network will help you amplify that brand. uh, if you're looking for those mentors, be specific about what you want to learn. Don't be general career focused, like, hey, Scott, can you help me in my career? Or how do I get to VP of sales? Make your ask very specific, which means you get actionable advice. And one of the things I love is like, if someone shares something with you, if someone gives you advice, tell them that you actually implemented this and here are the results from that advice, because that will give them the dopamine hit to continue helping you, continue following through with that advice. uh, a last thing, I really believe this within sales, this is like one of the big problems we face. Don't sell your solutions right away. First, uncover the problem and make the buyer feel the problem before you come to the point where you actually want to sell your solution. And I think that's so critical, and people miss out on that because it's a starting of, it's like if you set the context right, it's kind of the context, then the follow on conversation will happen much more seamlessly. But if your context is not right, which is basically buyers realizing that they have this problem which they need to solve today, then your follow on conversations, whatever you do, if you like, will not go in the fashion that you want it to go towards. Uh, so that's it from Scott. I do have the two winners, thanks to Devlina on the call. So first is Brandon, uh, and then second is Carrie. I think you both are on this call, at least last I saw, but we would both email you and we'll send you copies. It's fantastic to have Scott, you on the call. For all the other participants on the call, if you haven't checked out Sybil, please do. If you are using any other call recorder, it's way more accurate than most of the other tools that you've seen. We are giving a 3 month off if you're part of this webinar group. And finally, if you learned something today, if you found any valuable insight from today's discussion, please do share them with your network, your friends, share it on LinkedIn. Don't forget to tag Scott and Sybil. That would be amazing. Scott, again, thank you for a fantastic session. It was really a fun conversation,
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
knowing more about it. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Bye bye.
Hey, everybody.